And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, I'm really excited to have Molly Harper on the show with me. Molly has a brand new book that releases a week from today, and it's called A Proposal to Die For. I've read this book. I got an early release from her publisher, and it is a wonderful book. If you're a mystery lover like I am, you're going to love this book. Molly has an interesting story because Molly has written romance or romance adjacent books for quite a while. And this is her first foray into mystery. And so I want to pick your brain about, going from one genre to the other and what your experience has been. All that to say, welcome to the show, Molly.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Molly, I love to start the conversation with a fun question to just kind of set the tone, break the ice. And one question that I love to hear from people is, or an answer that I love to hear from people to the question, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, my mom said that I was a storyteller from as early as 4 or 5. She remembered walking past my room as I was playing, and my Barbies never went to a dance or a wedding or anything like that. My Barbies were always chasing a monster, trying to solve a Scooby-Doo mystery, trying to figure out who was haunting the house. And, there were constant epic battles between my Barbies and the Loch Ness Monster. And just very odd combinations of characters for a 4 or 5-year-old. I was always telling stories to someone, whether they were listening or not. And then I found my mom's old typewriter from college, and I taught myself to type on that. So it was really weird for like an 8 or 10-year-old to know how to type on a manual typewriter. But I really think, my whole life has been a series of steps to where I am right now.
Well, what an epic adventure it is for a kid to find a typewriter. That's, because a typewriter is different from a computer, especially a modern computer that's connected to the internet, because the computer really becomes a doorway to other things now. But a typewriter has a single sole purpose, and that's to put letters on the page. What do you remember when you discovered that typewriter, and what the first thing that triggered your creative brain?
I wrote a story about my class taking a trip around the world and losing a kid in every city through someone would fall in the canal in Venice, or there was terrible trouble at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and I showed it to my mom, and I had painstakingly typed this thing out. Just went with my 2 little fingers. I never learned Twin Peaks, by the way. I never learned word processing properly. I'm just self-taught. It horrifies my husband, who actually took like multiple proper typing classes in high school, because that's how old I am.
So you're a hunt and peck writer.
Well, not hunt and peck. I just have my own system.
Understood.
But yeah, I showed it to my mom, and she was proud, but she had questions. She had concerns. So there was always been sort of a twist of the macabre about what I do. So I think that really has led well into this new mystery foray for me.
So did you, from that moment going forward, when you were in school, was there ever like a teacher who kind of recognized the storytelling gene? Anyone besides your mom? And God love moms who, encourage.
Yes. And she is my biggest and first fan. I am a 3rd generation romance reader. My mom stole my grandma's romance novels, and I stole my mom's romance novels far before we were ready to read them. And we just hid under the covers and read books we weren't supposed to. But mom was always, big supporter. And then it was honestly librarians at my schools, because I was constantly going in and checking out those nonfiction sort of time life mystery of the paranormal. Here's a history of the ghosts of Appalachia. Here's a history of Bigfoot. All these, great monster and ghost books. And I would just check them out over and over and over again. And it was a strange relationship, but it also allowed me to spend lunch periods in the library when I didn't feel like socializing.
That's fantastic, actually.
I mean, there's many librarians have helped hone me into the person that I am today.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to support libraries nowadays.
Absolutely. So Over the last decade and a half or so of doing podcast about writing and writers, I've interviewed over 2,000 writers. And an interesting thing that I've found is that writers don't typically have a straight through narrative of them discovering that they want to be a writer and then becoming a writer. I can count on probably one hand the amount of writers who their sole purpose in life was to I want to be a writer. That's all I'm going to. And then they go to college and they get an MFA or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But everything is a pursuit toward that goal. Everything. And we don't take odd jobs. We write. And and there are a handful of those stories where they're the people that beat the system. But the wild amount of writers that do not fit in that camp are the overwhelming norm. Writers tend to have a circuitous route that brings them around to writing and publishing. What was it that brought you around to writing professionally?
I wanted to make a living as a writer I'm from a small town in Kentucky where there just weren't a lot of published authors. And so I thought, well, journalism would be a great way for me to earn a living doing something I really enjoy that I'm good at. And maybe one day I can work my way around to writing a book. And so I went to, a good journalism school. I started writing for my hometown newspaper. I really enjoyed the work. And I think a lot of sort of the absurdist in me came from writing some of the newspaper stories that I covered over the years. I loved waking up and not knowing when I was going to do that day because, there was a certain schedule that I had to keep. And, I covered the education beat. So I knew that there were school board meetings I had to cover and things like that. But sometimes it was like, hey, we need somebody to walk in the footprint of a future dam with the governor. Are you up for it? Like that kind of thing. And I loved just the improvisational nature, I guess, of it. But my husband also had a not 9-to-5 type job, and we had our first child, and one of us needed a normal schedule. And so I went to work as a Baptist church secretary, which is a very normal career progression from journalist to church secretary to romance novelist. But I still had, I wasn't working that crazy schedule. I wasn't writing every day, but I still had that writing energy. I was so used to writing every single day. And so I decided I was unhappy walking into bookstores and not seeing any novels by Molly Harper on the shelf, which when you think about the fact that I hadn't written any, that's a little illogical. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a book. I'm going to stop complaining and I'm just going to do it. And I wanted to write about vampires because I was still in mourning for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I knew from writing a feature column for the newspaper that people really were entertained when I humiliated or hurt myself. When I got injured, that was considered high entertainment.
Right.
So I wrote the most embarrassing way possible to become a vampire, which is being mistaken for a deer by a drunk hunter and being shot. And then a vampire comes along and saves the heroine by turning her into a vampire, and how she lives in her small town in Kentucky as a vampire with all of her neighbors knowing now, that she is undead. And how she lives her life. And it was a good year of me working on this manuscript. And then once I finished, I spent about 3 months looking for an agent because I didn't know anybody who had an agent. Yeah. And it was almost a full-time job, sending query letters out, getting rejections, and it was 10 letters out, rejected, 10 letters out, rejected, until finally I got one after 76 no's. And that one yes led to a sale to Simon & Schuster almost maybe 2 weeks later with for a 3-book deal, which is not at all typical. And I was very, very lucky. But I've just been at it ever since. Almost 50 books later, was finally able to write full time and, quit the day job. And I'm very, very grateful for the career that I've had.
That's incredible. I see. Those are the stories that I love to hear, Molly. This thing led to this thing, led to this thing. And when you think about it, when you're at the position you are now, I'll bet you can look back and all of the odd coincidences, this thing that led to this thing, those things probably recur in your writer toolbox from time to time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I've known quite a number of fiction writers who also did time as journalists.
Yep. Did time is a good way of putting it.
Right. But the odd thing when you think about it on the surface, you think fiction writer, journalist. Yes, they're both writers. They're both telling a story, but the demands are very different. One, you need to see a thing and report it as it is. The other thing, you see in your head and you kind of report as it is, but it only exists in your head. A good journalist probably shouldn't embellish much, other than as the story is as you see it through your eyes. In a bigger city like New York or LA or something, an event might happen and there might be 10 journalists that show up, and they're writing for different newspapers or television stations, and they'll all report on the same event, but it might look a little different just depending on their perspective and the other things that they're noticing and things like that. But what's funny to me is not funny, but is that these people that have spent time in journalism take something with them into fiction writing. And some folks will tell me, well, the biggest thing I took from it is learning to write on a deadline. That is, hugely beneficial. But I think there's probably other things that you learn as a journalist. Are there things that you have taken from that time into the fiction writing world with you?
I think not taking copy edits personally has really helped.
That's a big one.
You can't take changes to your work personally. For one thing, it's happening too fast. Like when you're writing a story that's coming out the next day and 3 people read it after you've turned it in and make their changes and, let you know what needs to be changed for flow or for, just punctuation. Because I still struggle with semicolons, but that's a whole other podcast.
Who doesn't?
But when you have, that many people sort of making changes to your story, you cannot take those things personally. And so going through the number of edits that a novel has to go through in order to make it to press, you do, it's not that you don't care, but you can't take it as, oh, this is a personal insult, the fact that they want to change this paragraph. Like they're criticizing me as a person. It's like, no, this is just going to make your book better. So put in the work, do the revisions, fight for the lines that you think need to be fought for, but just understand that the press is trying to put out the best product possible.
Gotcha. That's great advice. So you started your fiction writing career with a 3-book deal about vampires.
Yes.
So was this a paranormal romance? Like how would you classify where this falls on the genre spectrum?
It was definitely paranormal romance, and everyone was sort of riding the Twilight wave at the time. I was very fortunate to have timed completely by accident the release of a vampire novel during that time, because readers really were eager to read about vampires at the time. So I was part of a very fortunate pack, I think.
Yeah. That makes me think of, people talk about either writing to the market or avoiding writing to the market because, you never know when you can time, these lucky breaks where you just happen to land, while there's a huge wave. But even when that wave has passed and a lot of publishers are hesitant to buy more vampire books because, that was so 2010 or, whatever that was. A lot of what I've discovered is that a lot of times there are still readers for those books out there, that they enjoyed those books and they wouldn't mind reading more. How do you approach kind of what's hot in the genre space at the moment? And do you think about that, or is it just, I'm going to write what's entertaining to me and, eventually there'll be a reader market for it? Like, how do you think in those terms? Because, with 50 books out, you've got to have your ear to the market and, because you can't afford to just waste, a year or two of your life writing something that that no one is asking for. So how do you balance that?
Well, I think that you're correct in that there are readers that are always going to love vampires or love witches
Yeah.
or love, ghosts in the paranormal genre. But I think you do have to pay a little bit of attention to market in terms of what readers are just absolutely not reading. Like there are some, some genres or markets that, just kind of have dried up. But I think you can't really try to hit those very niche genre marks right now because it takes 2 years sometimes for a book to make it to market. So by the
Yeah.
time you've written it, that moment has passed. So I
Right.
think just keep your ear to the ground, see what's really popular. And if that appeals to you, chase it. But if it doesn't, stick with what you love because you don't want to punish yourself by spending those months writing a
Right.
book you don't enjoy writing because that comes across to the reader. The
Sure
reader
does.
can tell, like, oh, they phoned this in.
Right.
Um, so find something you love, put your own twist to what is currently hot, and make it your own and run with it.
Great advice. Great advice. So after that vampire trilogy, what came next? Like, and did you deliver that trilogy on time? What was that a good publishing experience?
It absolutely was a wonderful publishing experience. And of course, I turned it in on time because I was still a newspaper kid enough that,
Oh
like, the
yeah,
idea of being late actually gave me hives. So
right.
I don't think I've ever actually missed a deadline
Amazing.
because the idea is just so overwhelming to me that I can't do it.
Right.
But I think the next series was the Naked Werewolf series, which was about
Okay.
a woman that moved to Alaska and found herself in a interpack territorial dispute. And
Okay.
this was a very different experience for her. And I think after that, I wrote some women's fiction with And One Last Thing. And there were haunted house books. And then there was the Southern Eclectic series. So it was just sort of me bouncing back and forth between
Yeah.
women's fiction and paranormal romance. And I've just kind of written what appealed to me over the years.
Gotcha. Um, are there things that you learned about the paranormal romance space from because it sounds like you were obviously a fan of those
Mhm.
types of stories. So then when you got into it from an author's perspective, so you're sitting across the table, so to speak, from from being a reader to now you're the person working on these books. Were there any things that you kind of learned about publishing or the industry, getting to see it from the other side?
I actually, you mentioned earlier going to MFA programs, and I think
Yeah.
one of the biggest revelations for me as a paranormal romance author is I sat down in a class at an MFA program, and the teacher was like, "Okay, we're going to talk about magic systems. If you're going to have magic in your universe, there have to be rules." And I had already written multiple books with magic in
Right.
them, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. There should be rules." I was so embarrassed. It's like, I've just been out here firing off spells willy-nilly this whole time. It was
That's
the best
funny.
advice I've ever gotten. So yes, on world building in that sort of thing, like being more responsible with your world building has been something that I have learned over the years, and I really have valued and tried to put that into best practice.
I love it. I love it. Your new book, which releases a week from today, A Proposal to Die For. You have firmly entrenched yourself in the romance space and the paranormal romance space. Um, why the genre shift?
It I was writing this story after finding out about proposal planning as a
Okay.
job. I was fascinated because I never thought about that. But you have party planners, you have wedding planners. Why could you not have proposal planning as a job? And I was like, well, there's obviously a book in there somewhere. And so
Oh
I
yeah.
started, jotting down what the story would be. And the more I wrote about this woman who is in an isolated space surrounded by people that are more privileged than she is, who she
Mhm.
really can't stand that much,
Yeah.
the more I realized this was an old school Agatha Christie mystery.
Yes.
This was the haves and the have nots facing off in a space they're forced to share, and then there's a murder. So I really just approached it from that perspective, and it really just sort of came to me. And of course, because it's me, there are going to be ridiculous twists and turns and circumstances because I can't write anything serious. I've tried. And so it really just came to me, and it was a lot of fun. I did learn a lot about pacing and plotting a mystery over the course of the edits, and I cannot thank S.E. Soga, my editor, enough, because she did a wonderful job of coaching me through this new genre.
So from the books that you have written before to now tackling this one, was the structure really that different? Like in your paranormal romance, isn't there usually like something that happens and there's something to be unraveled, which has a lot of the hallmarks of mystery, but there's other things as well. But like, did your brain kind of understand the assignment of writing a mystery? Like, was it wildly different from what you were doing?
I think I had the rough understanding of the structure down, but it was just the fine tuning of, you have to introduce your villain really early. You can't leave that until several chapters in. The reader has to start suspecting early on, and you have to do the Chekhov's gun of the murder weapon has to be somewhere,
and you have to allude to it without announcing it.
Exactly. And me, like, I am not a particularly sneaky person, so me hiding clues was different. And so I really, I had to bounce ideas off of my family members a lot. And I would have ideas in the middle of the night about how to work things out. And I leave index cards on my nightstand, and I'll write notes to myself. And sometimes, because of my very bad handwriting, they came across as threatening to people that found them in the house. So I had to be a little careful about that. But I will never say that I have completely grasped this new structure of storytelling, but I have a better understanding now.
So what is your planning process like?
I used to be a pantser.
Okay.
And my agent told me to stop doing that to myself because it was very clearly stressing me out. So I read a book called Screenwriting Tips for Authors by Alexandra Sokolov. And she taught a class at an RT convention once that was basically breaking all stories down to the Romancing the Stone plot. And she gave us a copy of her, plotting timeline. And I have that saved on my computer now. And every time I'm plotting out a story, I use that timeline as a guide. And then I started using index cards that are color coded. And so I will plot out each plot point along that timeline from Ms. Sokolov's book. And it's chapter by chapter. The points are colored, red for romance, blue for action, green for background, yellow for exposition, and now orange for murder. So I know, like, when I put all the cards down on the table, if I have too much of one color in a chapter, I've gone too far. Like, I need to spread the romance all the way across the story. I need to make sure there's an action point in each chapter. If there's a bunch of exposition in one place, I've done something wrong. And so, but at the same time, if there's no romance, if there's no red, so it's just a really good way of sort of color mapping your story and making sure that everything is spread out across the plot well. It takes up most of my dining room. It looks like a serial killer tracking board, like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme.
Understood. Yeah.
It's kind of alarming, but even though it is a lot of work, it really, really helps.
Yeah. In Dabble, we have a plot grid, which allows you to make cards, and you can do different plot lines, and you can color code those cards. So you can say, okay, in this scene, I've got romance. In this scene, I've got a murder, and having that visual representation of looking and seeing how the story unfolds, without just getting lost in pages and pages of text is a huge game changer. So I can appreciate that. That meme that you're talking about,
that is me trying to explain the plot.
Exactly. And they're like, I don't want to be alone with him. This is getting uncomfortable.
That's fair. I understand. I'm leaving these scary index cards all around the house.
Right. So if did kind of plotting that way with your color coded cards, did that help you? Like when you're writing mystery, you're absolutely right that you have to introduce things early. The reader has to see it, has to file it away in their brain without feeling like it was a billboard, with
Mm,
the, this is the murderer, this is how it happened, because what's the saying that a great mystery at the end, you should say, oh, I should have seen that coming,
hmm
but not see it coming, but like I could have unraveled that mystery and all of it was right in front of me, because you never want the deus ex machina, the at the end, well, aliens did it. Well, that's no fun for anybody,
that would be amazing. Like it's not the butler, it's an alien.
right, right. And they just come out of nowhere. And you could probably get away with that for once,
Once,
but maybe no one would buy the next 50 books that you write.
probably not. No.
But what, that's neither here nor there. So like what did you learn about pacing the story and about hiding clues? Because this, you're very firmly entrenched in writing these other stories, probably to the point that you could probably start writing and just inherently understand the structure that you're writing toward after doing it so many times. I would imagine, but choosing a new genre with new genre conventions and reader expectations, like how did you start kind of teaching yourself about how the story lays out?
I I've said this a couple of times in the last couple of weeks talking about the book.
Yeah.
What I've learned is that there's a romance arc. There are certain plot
Okay.
points you have to hit in a romance. The meet cute, the flirty banter, establishing the rapport and, whether these two people actually want to be around each other or not. And then of course, rising tension, sex scene, there's a conflict. Will these two people end up with each other? We don't know. And then resolution. It's very much the same with mystery. There are expected points you have to hit for the reader to be engaged. Again, introducing the killer secretly, finding the body, revealing the weapon, clues, clues, clues. And then, there has to be a course of the investigation, and then the killer is revealed, and then revolution. So writing a mystery with a romance element, you kind of have to pair those two arcs without, overcrowding the chapters and losing the reader's interest. So that, it's a learning process. And I think the main thing I've learned is just, you got to give the reader some breathing points between both arcs. And sometimes there just has to be a silly sit down scene where everybody is just talking smack to each other for a little bit, and you take a breath, and then you get right back to investigating for the killer. So
Right. With publishing 50 books, you're obviously not writing one book a year.
no.
What is your kind of production schedule like?
It's I would say about 3 to 4 months to write a manuscript. It kind of depends on, what conflicting deadlines I have going.
Yeah.
But I always have everybody asks me like, oh, are you working on something right now? Yes, always.
Yes,
I am always working on something. I cannot think of a time in the last 15 years I have not been working on a book. But I have a manuscript that's going. Usually I have copy edits that have come back to me, or revisions that have come back to me, or, pages where I'm making final corrections. So I'm always working on something. And when I'm lucky, it's just one thing.
Do you, have you noticed that the production schedules for mysteries are different from the production schedules of romance? Like, is one expected for an author to publish more often than another, or has that even come up?
I haven't been in the field long enough, I think, for it to, be a noticeable difference. I mean, I have a very established, publication timeline with my romances, but so far it's working very much the same. And the publisher has been very lovely and gentle with me. So I can't say that I've felt rushed or anything like that.
Yeah. I know a question a lot of readers after next Tuesday are going to have when A Proposal to Die For hits shelves is that they're going to want to know are there going to be more books with Jess? Because what a fantastic character she is. And did you come into this thinking about series potential?
I mean, there's always a chance for a character to take off and have their own series, but for right now, Jess is a one book character.
Okay.
But I am working on another mystery right now, and I'm in revisions for it. It is currently untitled because my titling process is epic and takes several steps and the supervision of 2 adults. Just
Understood.
it's a long process. But right now, we're calling it Cute Little Murder Getaway, but I don't know if that's going to make it to the page.
Love it. Love it. Well, Proposal to Die For releases everywhere next Tuesday. We're going to put links to it in the show notes where if you don't have a great local bookstore, you can pick it up from Amazon, or I'm assuming it will be available from Audible on release day.
Amanda Ronconi will narrate.
Oh, nice.
And I'm very, very happy that we got her because she is the voice that lives in my head when I write.
Love it. Love it. Molly, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, what is the best place for them to find you online and to get plugged in with everything that you're doing?
I have a website, mollyharper.com, kept it very simple. And you can always find me on Threads, Instagram. I post on Blue Sky. And I do post on YouTube on occasion, but I struggle with the video medium. So that's okay.
Understood. Well, we'll link up your website and those places to make it easy for folks to find you. Molly, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of A Proposal to Die For next Tuesday. This has been a fun conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.